The stars out near the edge of the solar system were quiet. They were always quiet. Nothing moved out there except ice, rock, and the slow drift of ancient light. The alien ship called the Kethari Observer had been floating in that silence for 6 standard hours, waiting and watching. Its commander, a tall gray-skinned creature named Zulthane, stood at the front window with his 4 thin fingers pressed together. He was not the kind of leader who panicked easily. But what he was seeing on his monitors right now was making him very uncomfortable. The signal had appeared 3 hours ago. A massive energy spike, unlike anything in the galactic database. Not a star flare. Not a natural anomaly. Something was moving through space at a speed that made no sense for an object of its size. The Kethari Observer's science officer, a pale and bony creature named Renvi, had been running calculations since the moment the signal appeared. He kept getting the same answer and kept refusing to believe it. The object was large. Very large. And it was moving fast. Not fast like a fighter ship or a scout vessel. Fast like something that had decided the rules of physics were more of a suggestion than a law. Zulthane leaned toward the main screen. The shape began to take form as the observer's long-range cameras adjusted and zoomed in. What came into focus made the entire bridge go silent. It was a warship. Human-made, clearly, based on the crude but oddly beautiful design of the hull. But it was unlike any human vessel the Galactic Council had ever recorded. Human ships were supposed to be small, slow, and simple. The Council had monitored humanity for decades. They built colony transports and basic patrol craft. They were not supposed to be building anything like this. The ship was enormous. Its hull was dark gray and thick, almost like it had been carved out of solid metal rather than constructed piece by piece. There were no visible engine pods. No standard thruster arrays along the side. No glowing exhaust trails that every other spacefaring ship in the known galaxy produced when it moved. And yet it was moving. Smoothly. Silently. At a speed that made Renvi's calculations look like a cruel joke. The hull had no clean lines. It jutted out in odd angles, with plates layered over plates, ridges running diagonally across the surface in patterns that seemed random but somehow were not. There were no visible weapon ports anywhere. No launch bays. No obvious armor joints. It looked, to Renvi, like someone had taken a very good warship and then hidden everything about it that made it dangerous. That thought scared him more than if the weapons had been showing. Zulthane ordered his crew to hail the ship. The communication officer opened a channel on the standard human frequency. There was a short pause. Then a calm voice answered in clean and unhurried English. The voice belonged to a man named Leon Hargrove. He was sitting in the command chair of his ship, the USS Iron Covenant, with a cup of cold coffee in one hand and a data pad in the other. He was not a tall man, not especially young, with short brown hair and a face that looked like it had seen too many long shifts and not enough sleep. But his voice was steady and his eyes were sharp. "Captain Hargrove," he said simply. "Iron Covenant. Who am I speaking with?" Zulthane identified himself and his vessel, then asked, in careful and formal language, what the Iron Covenant was doing this far out from human-controlled space. Leon looked at his first officer, Commander Petra Vance, a tall and direct woman who was already pulling up the ship's status reports without being asked. She gave him a small nod that meant everything was fine. Leon turned back to the screen. He told Zulthane that they were on a routine patrol run, testing the ship's long-range performance, making sure everything worked the way it was supposed to. There was a long pause from the alien vessel. "Routine patrol," Zulthane repeated slowly, as if the words tasted strange. "That is correct," Leon said. Another pause. Then Zulthane asked, very carefully, if the Iron Covenant would be willing to hold its position while the Kethari Observer moved closer for a visual inspection. Leon set down his coffee. He looked at Petra again. She gave a small shrug that meant she had no objections but thought the aliens were nervous about something. He looked at his tactical officer, Lieutenant Nina Walsh, a compact and focused woman who was already running a passive scan of the alien ship. She gave him a thumbs up that meant no weapons were charging and no threat was present. Leon turned back to the screen and told Zulthane that they were happy to wait. On the alien bridge, Renvi leaned close to Zulthane and whispered that the human ship had not even raised its shields when hailed by an unknown vessel. Zulthane watched the Iron Covenant on his screen. It hung in the dark like a dark mountain, completely still, giving off almost no heat signature, making almost no sound in the sensor readings. He said nothing for a moment. Then he told Renvai to prepare a full recording of everything they were observing and to begin transmitting it to the Galactic Council immediately. Because whatever that ship was, the Council needed to know about it. The alien shuttle docked with the Iron Covenant 40 minutes later. It attached to the outer bay with a soft clunk, and 3 alien inspectors came aboard. Zulthane was among them. Renvai was there too, carrying a small recording device and a datapad, his large eyes moving around the docking bay like he was trying to memorize everything at once. The third alien was a quiet one named Esiviona, who served as a technical specialist for the Kethari Council Division. Captain Leon Hargrove was waiting for them at the bay door. He was not in formal dress. He was in his standard duty uniform, which was dark blue and slightly wrinkled at the sleeves. He offered a handshake, which the aliens accepted awkwardly but politely, and then he told them he would give them the full tour. They started at the engine room. The engine room of the Iron Covenant was large and warm and smelled faintly of machine oil and something chemical that Renvai could not identify. The chief engineer was already there waiting for them. His name was Dale Okafor, and he was a big man with broad shoulders and a constant look of mild amusement on his face, like he was always remembering a joke he hadn't told yet. He was wearing a work jacket covered in old grease marks and a small pin on his chest that said World's Okayest Engineer, which none of the aliens understood, but Leon had long since stopped trying to explain. Dale began walking them through the drive system. He called it the dual-core fold engine. It did not push the ship through space, he explained. It folded the space around the ship, creating a kind of pocket that moved. The ship sat inside that pocket and moved with it. That was why there were no thruster exhaust trails. That was why there was almost no heat signature. The ship was not burning anything to move. It was simply convincing space to carry it. Renvai stopped writing notes and stared at Dale for a long moment. He asked how long it had taken to develop this technology. Dale thought about it. He said about 11 years. But the first 4 were mostly theory. The real work happened in the last 7. He scratched the back of his neck and added that the original idea had come to him during a long weekend in a rented cabin in Nevada when the internet was down and he had nothing else to do. Renvai wrote that down. He was not sure it was relevant, but he wrote it down anyway. They moved on to the armor plating next. Dale brought them to an interior wall section where a display panel had been opened up to show the layers underneath. There were 6 distinct layers of composite material, each one designed for a different kind of damage. The outermost layer was built to scatter energy weapons like plasma and directed radiation. The second layer was a dense alloy designed to stop kinetic rounds. The third was a flexible carbon mesh that absorbed shock waves. The remaining 3 layers were combinations of the first 3, each one slightly different in composition, each one a backup for the others. Esiviona reached out and touched the surface of the innermost layer. She asked what it was made of. Dale named 3 materials in a row. 2 of them were known to the aliens. The third one was not in any galactic database. Zulthane looked at Leon and asked where the third material came from. Leon said it was developed by a material scientist at a university in Ohio about 9 years ago. He said her name was Dr. Carla Morrow, and that she had originally been trying to make a better heat shield for re-entry vehicles. The armor application came later. Zulthane said nothing. He simply nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they have just received information they are not entirely comfortable with. The last stop on the tour was the weapons deck. This was the part that Nina Walsh handled. She met them at the entrance and led them through a long corridor that looked, at first glance, completely empty. The walls were smooth. There were no gun barrels, no missile tubes, no visible ports of any kind. Renvai looked at the walls and then looked at Nina and said, very carefully, that he did not see any weapons. Nina smiled. She pressed a button on the wall panel beside her. The corridor changed. Panels slid back. Rails emerged from the walls. Targeting arrays dropped down from the ceiling. Launch tubes extended from slots that had been invisible a moment before. In under 2 seconds, what had been a smooth empty corridor was now a fully active weapons bay, with 6 separate systems visible and 2 more extending further down the hall. Renvai stood completely still. Nina explained that the full deployment time for the entire weapons complement was just under 1 second from the moment of command. She said the targeting system could track and engage 40 separate objects simultaneously. She said the maximum effective range was 3 light seconds for the primary rail system. Siviona asked, in a very quiet voice, how many ships like this one existed. Leon, who had been standing near the back, hands in his pockets, answered that question with a calm smile and said that was a topic for another day. That evening, back on the Kethari Observer, Renvai sat alone at his console and finished his emergency report to the Galactic Council. He wrote every detail carefully. Then he sat back and looked at the dark screen for a long time before he hit send. He was not a creature who frightened easily either. But his hands were shaking slightly as he pressed the button. The Galactic Council chamber on Station Velrose Prime was one of the most impressive rooms in the known galaxy. It was built inside a hollowed asteroid, with walls of polished dark stone and a ceiling so high it disappeared into artificial shadow. 6 curved rows of seats surrounded a central speaking floor, 1 row for each of the 6 council races. Every seat had its own translation panel and data screen. The room was designed to make every voice feel important. Today, most of those voices were panicking. The emergency session had been called within hours of Renvai's report reaching the council. Every seat was filled. The translation systems were working hard. The central floor had 3 representatives already standing and talking over each other, which was against protocol, but nobody was stopping them because the High Arbiter, a very old and slow-moving creature named Dosvale, was still watching the recording for the Iron Covenant's weapons bay for the 4th time. He watched the wall panels open. He watched the weapons deploy in under 2 seconds. He watched Nina Walsh explain the targeting range in a calm voice like she was describing a simple kitchen appliance. Then he closed the recording and sat very still for a moment. The council representative who spoke first was from the Vethnar race, a species known for being very loud when worried. He said that humanity had clearly broken the weapon development accords by constructing a warship of this class without council approval or notification. He said this was a direct violation. He said action had to be taken immediately. 3 other representatives agreed loudly. Siviona, who had returned to Velrose Prime and was sitting in the technical observer section rather than the main seats, said nothing. She was reading through the specifications Renvai had recorded, and her expression was not one of fear. It was one of deep and genuine fascination. The chamber door opened at that moment. The council's communication officer walked quickly to the center floor and announced that the human ambassador had arrived and was requesting entry. Dosvale gave the order to let her in. Earth's diplomatic envoy to the Galactic Council was a woman named Grace Fuller. She was not especially tall. She had short gray hair cut very neatly and wore a dark jacket and simple pants. She was carrying a datapad in one hand and a travel cup of coffee in the other because she had been given less than 90 minutes of notice before the session began and had not had time to finish her morning routine. She walked to the center floor without hurrying, set her coffee and her datapad on the small speaker's table, and looked around the room with a calm and even expression. Dosvale addressed her directly. He said that the Galactic Council had become aware of the existence of the vessel known as the Iron Covenant, and that according to the weapon development accords signed by all recognized spacefaring civilizations, no single species had the right to construct a warship of that capability level without prior Council review and approval. He said that humanity had violated this agreement and that the Council was demanding an immediate explanation. Grace picked up her coffee. She took a slow sip. Then she set it back down. She said, very politely, that she appreciated the Council's concern. She then said that humanity had never signed the weapon development accords. The room got very quiet. She continued. She said that the weapon development accords were ratified 14 years ago by the 6 founding Council species. At that time, Earth had applied for Council membership and been told that the application was under review. The review had never been completed. No invitation had ever been sent. And because Earth was not a Council member, Earth was not a party to any Council accord. The representative from the Vethnar race started to say something. Grace held up one hand, not rudely, just firmly, and kept speaking. She said that Earth had built the Iron Covenant for a very specific reason. She said that in the previous 8 years, 3 human colony stations had been attacked by unidentified vessels in the outer sectors. Earth had filed formal reports with the Galactic Council on all 3 occasions. None of those reports had received a response. No Council investigation had been opened. No aid had been sent. The colonists had handled the situations themselves, at considerable cost. She paused. She looked at Dosvale specifically. She said that when a civilization realized it could not rely on others for its protection, it made its own arrangements. Dosvale was quiet for a long time. Then he said that regardless of Earth's membership status, the Council could not allow a single species to possess a weapons platform of this kind without oversight. He said the Iron Covenant must be decommissioned. Grace picked up her coffee again. She held it in both hands and looked at Dosvale with a perfectly neutral face. She said that was not going to happen. Another long silence filled the chamber. Then Grace said, quietly and clearly, that the Council should also be aware that the Iron Covenant was not the only ship of its class. She said she would be happy to discuss the full details of Earth's current defensive fleet if the Council wished to schedule a formal briefing. She said her calendar was open most of next week. She picked up her datapad, finished the last of her coffee, and told Dosvale that she looked forward to a productive conversation. Siviona, in the observer section, quietly closed her datapad and allowed herself a very small smile. The demonstration was held 5 days later in the neutral zone between human and Council-monitored space. It had been arranged quickly, which was unusual for the Council, but Dosvale had insisted on it. He wanted to see the Iron Covenant's capabilities with his own eyes before the situation moved any further. 6 alien warships were arranged in a wide observation arc at what the Council considered a safe distance. Several of those ships were some of the most advanced vessels in the Galactic Fleet. None of them moved closer than they had to. 3 decommissioned freighter hulks had been placed at different points in the test zone as targets. They were empty, stripped of everything useful, and anchored in place with basic stabilizers. The smallest one was about 1 kilometer long. The largest was almost 4 kilometers from bow to stern. All 3 were placed at extreme range from the Iron Covenant, spread far apart from each other so that hitting more than one at a time would require either multiple shots or extraordinary precision. The Council observers were watching from their ship's screens. Zulthane was among them, standing at his bridge window with his arms folded. Renvi had his recording equipment running on 3 separate channels. On the bridge of the Iron Covenant, the mood was calm and professional. Leon was in his command chair. Petra was at her station, checking the ship systems one final time. Nina Walsh was at the tactical console, fingers moving quietly over the controls as she finished the targeting calculations. Dale Okafor was in the engine room. He had been given very clear instructions by both Leon and Nina to simply monitor the drive systems and not adjust anything. He had agreed to this twice. He was currently making one small adjustment that he was fairly certain neither of them would notice until after the demonstration was over. Leon gave the ready order. Nina confirmed target lock on all 3 hulks. She reported that targeting solution was set and weapons were charged. She looked at Leon and waited. Leon said, "Go ahead." What happened in the next 4 seconds was something that no alien observer on any of the 6 ships fully processed in the moment. The Iron Covenant fired. There was no bright flash from a single barrel. There was no sequence of shots. The ship seemed to shiver once, almost gently, and then all 3 targets came apart at the same time. Not sequentially. Simultaneously. 3 separate explosions bloomed in the dark at 3 different points in space, all at the same instant, all at extreme range, all perfectly centered on their targets. The alien instruments went chaotic for a moment. Every sensor system was trying to calculate what had just happened. The readings did not make sense. The Iron Covenant had fired from multiple angles at once, which should have been impossible for a single ship. The targeting had been so precise that the impacts on each hulk had been centered to within 2 meters of the designated strike points. And then Renvi's instruments registered something else. A gravity distortion spike, brief but significant, centered on the Iron Covenant at the moment of firing. Not the kind produced by the drive system. Something different. Something that should have required a generator the size of a small space station. Renvi stared at his readings. He checked them again. They said the same thing. He turned to Zulthane and said, very quietly, that he was not sure he understood what they had just witnessed. On the Iron Covenant, the crew was quiet for a moment after the shots. Then Dale's voice came over the internal channel from the engine room. He said the adjustment he had made to the gravity coil had worked better than expected and that the reflected targeting lock had been about 12% more stable than in the last test run. Nina Walsh turned her chair around very slowly and looked at the engine room door even though Dale was not there. Leon pressed the channel button and asked Dale if he had just said he made an adjustment. Dale said that technically he had made a very small adjustment. He also said that technically it had worked, so he felt that deserved some consideration. Leon closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Then he opened them and told Dale to write down exactly what he had done and not touch anything else until they were back at port. Dale said that was fair. On the alien observation ships, nobody spoke for nearly a full minute after the shots landed. Then the council channel opened and Dosvale's voice came through, asking the Iron Covenant to confirm that the demonstration was complete. Leon told him it was. Another long pause. Then Dosvale asked, in a voice that was slightly less formal than usual, if the Iron Covenant's crew required any assistance or resupply before the conclusion of the exercise. Leon looked at Petra. Petra looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment because neither of them could quite believe the question. Leon thanked Dosvale and said they were fine. He then pressed the ship-wide channel and told the crew to stand down from combat stations. He said dinner would be served in 30 minutes and that today had been a good day. In the Galactic Council chamber, an aide quietly leaned toward Dosvale and asked him, in a low voice, what the human word terrifying meant. Dosvale watched the Iron Covenant on his screen. It sat perfectly still in the dark, enormous and patient, surrounded by the drifting debris of 3 ships it had destroyed in under 5 seconds. He told the aide to look it up. The Galactic Council's closed session lasted 9 hours. That was unusual. Most sessions lasted 2 or 3. A 9-hour session meant something significant was being decided, and everyone who worked on Velrose Prime knew it. The maintenance workers in the corridors outside the chamber moved quietly. The food servers in the council lounge spoke in low voices. Even the station's communication systems seemed to hum at a lower frequency, as if the building itself understood that something important was happening inside. Ambassador Grace Fuller spent most of those 9 hours in her small office down the hall, working through her regular correspondence and drinking 3 more cups of coffee. She was not invited into the session. She had not expected to be. She had said what she needed to say, and now it was time for the council to work through it on their own. At the end of the 9th hour, the chamber doors opened. Dosvale came out first. He moved slowly, as he always did, his ancient body steady and deliberate. He walked to Grace's office door and knocked twice. She told him to come in. He entered and stood near the door because there was only one chair and Grace was already sitting in it. He said that the council had reached a decision. He said that the Galactic Council had voted to formally invite Earth to join as a full member, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with membership. He said the vote had been unanimous, which he admitted was something that had not happened in over 40 years of council history. Grace looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and her datapad. She thanked him and said she was glad to hear it. She asked him to have the formal paperwork sent to her office by morning so she could review the terms and begin the acceptance process. Dosvale said he would arrange it. He started to leave, then stopped at the door. He turned back. He said, in a voice that was quieter than his formal tone, that the council had also discussed the 3 colony station attacks that Grace had mentioned. He said an investigation would be opened. Grace said she appreciated that. She said Earth had always been willing to work with the council. It had simply needed the council to be willing to work with Earth. Dosvale nodded once. Then he left. Out near the neutral zone, the Iron Covenant was still holding position. The council ships had mostly returned to their routes, but 2 of them had remained. One was the Kethari Observer. The other was a Vethna patrol vessel whose commander had sent a short transmission asking if it would be acceptable to remain in the area for a short time. Leon had said yes without asking why. The crew of the Iron Covenant had gathered on the small recreational deck near the center of the ship. It was not a large space, maybe 30 meters across, with low ceilings and a row of windows along one wall that looked out at the stars. Someone had brought out a portable grill from storage. Dale had somehow found a box of spices that he insisted he had been saving for a special occasion. Petra had organized the seating with the same precision she used for battle formations. They cooked and ate and talked. Leon sat near the window with a plate of food and watched the stars. Zulthane's ship was visible as a distant light, holding steady a few thousand kilometers away. Nina Walsh came and sat beside him. She had her own plate and a bottle of something cold. She looked out the window for a while without speaking. Then she said that things were going to be different now. Not just for the ship. For all of humanity. Leon said he knew. She asked him if he thought the council would actually follow through. On the investigation. On the membership. On everything they had said. He thought about it for a moment. He said he thought they would. Not because they suddenly trusted humanity, but because they now understood something about humanity that they had not understood before. And understanding, he said, was usually the beginning of respect. Nina was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if he thought Dale had actually improved the gravity coil or if they had just gotten lucky. Leon said he was genuinely not sure and that this was the part that worried him most about Dale. That evening, a private transmission arrived on Leon's personal channel. It was from Zulthane. Not a formal communication. Just a short message, sent as one officer to another. It said only, "Were you always capable of this, or did something change?" Leon sat with the message for a while. Then he wrote back. He said that humans had always been capable. They simply needed a reason. He sent it and looked out at the stars. The next morning, as the Iron Covenant began its slow turn toward home, both the Kethari Observer and the Vethna patrol vessel moved to flank her. Neither had been asked. Neither had said anything. They simply took up positions on either side and matched speed. It was the first time in history that alien warships had voluntarily escorted a human vessel. On the bridge, Petra noticed it first and told Leon. He looked at the screens showing the two ships keeping pace beside them, one on the left and one on the right, moving together through the dark. He did not say anything for a moment. He just looked. Then he told the crew to hold course and steady speed, and that they would be home in 4 days. Renvai, on the Kethari Observer, was already writing a new report. This one was not about danger or threat assessments. It was a recommendation to the Galactic Council Science Division to open a formal research collaboration with human engineers. He had pages of notes. He had questions he had been wanting to ask since the moment Dale had explained the fold engine. He had the feeling, deep in his bones, that whatever humanity was going to build next would be something the galaxy had never seen before. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that this thought made him very excited.